Lucille Ball was a genius and a tyrant. On the I Love Lucy set, she demanded perfection. Every line exact, every laugh timed perfectly, every episode flawless. Her children grew up terrified of disappointing her. Her employees called her a monster. Her second husband, Gary Morton, lived in her shadow, a prop in the Lucy show. She couldn't help it. Control was how she survived childhood chaos. Perfectionism was armor against the world. But control is lonely, and Lucy died having pushed away nearly everyone who tried to love her, surrounded by people who worked for her, but no one who truly knew her. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. The need for control was carved into Lucille Ball before she had language for what control meant, before she understood that some children grow up in chaos and spend the rest of their lives trying to impose order on a universe that proved early it couldn't be trusted. She was born August 6, 1911, in Jamestown, New York, to Henry Durrell Ball and Desiree Day Hunt Ball, and for the first 3 years of her life, the world was safe. Her father worked for the Bell Telephone Company, her mother took care of the home, and little Lucille, already tall for her age, already intense, already watching everything with those sharp blue eyes, believed that fathers stayed, and mothers were constant, and families were permanent. Then, in February 1915, when Lucille was 3 years old and her brother Fred was not yet born, Henry Ball died of typhoid fever. He was 37 years old. One day Lucille had a father who lifted her up and called her his girl, and the next day he was gone, and no one could explain it in ways that made sense to a 3-year-old. Dead wasn't a concept she understood. Dead was just Daddy not coming home, Daddy not being there, the first hole carved into her heart that would never quite heal. She was too young to process grief properly, too young to understand permanence, old enough only to learn that the world was not safe, that people left without warning, that love was not protection against loss. Her mother, Didi, overwhelmed with grief and poverty, and a toddler daughter and a pregnancy, made a choice that seemed practical, but was emotionally catastrophic. She sent Lucille to live with her parents, Fred and Florabelle Hunt, while she worked and gave birth to Fred Jr. To Didi, it was temporary necessity. She needed to work, needed help, would take Lucille back once she was stable. To Lucille, it was the second abandonment. First her father died and left her. Then her mother sent her away. The message absorbed by a traumatized 3-year-old was clear. She was too much trouble, too burdensome, not worth keeping. Her grandparents did their best, but Fred Hunt was old-fashioned and strict. Florabelle was overwhelmed, and neither quite knew what to do with an intense, grieving, angry little girl who had lost everything she'd counted on. Lucille acted out, screaming, tantrums, refusing to obey, because acting out was at least a form of control. If she was going to be sent away anyway, she might as well give them a reason. If people were going to leave, she'd make sure they left on her terms. When Didi remarried in 1918 to Ed Peterson, Lucille was brought back to live with her mother and new stepfather and baby brother Fred. She was 7 years old, returning to a mother who felt like a stranger, and a family that didn't include her father. Ed Peterson was not abusive in the dramatic way of movie villains. He didn't beat her bloody or lock her in closets. But he was cold, critical, uninterested in the emotional needs of his new stepdaughter. He had his own children from a previous marriage, and the blended family was a battlefield of competing loyalties and resentments. Lucille learned that stepfathers were not fathers, that her mother's attention now had to be shared with a husband and a son, that she was always going to be slightly outside whatever family was being built. The reminder of Didi's first marriage and dead husband. Ed Peterson ran the household with rigid discipline. Children were to be seen and not heard. Emotions were weaknesses. Crying was indulgence. Lucille, who had mountains of grief to process, her father's death, Her mother's abandonment, the loss of her grandparents when she was returned, the displacement in her own family. Was told to be quiet, to be good, to stop being so difficult. She learned to hide her feelings, to present a composed exterior, to control every visible reaction, because showing emotion invited criticism. It was training she would use for the rest of her life, the ability to perform normalcy while dying inside, to make faces and pratfalls and comedy while feeling nothing funny at all. School was no refuge. Lucille was tall and awkward, too intense, too emotional when she cracked, too controlled when she didn't. She didn't fit in with other girls, didn't understand the social games, was more interested in performing and attention than in dolls and gossip. She discovered early that she could make people laugh, that physical comedy, making faces, falling down, being ridiculous, got her the attention that being good never earned. If she couldn't be loved, she could at least be noticed. If she couldn't be wanted, she could at least be funny. At 15, Lucille moved to New York City to attend drama school, desperate to escape Jamestown and the family that had never quite felt like home after her father died. The John Murray Anderson School for the Dramatic Arts was supposed to be her ticket to becoming a serious actress, but Lucy was told repeatedly that she had no talent, that she was too tall, too gawky, too something. Her instructors saw a girl trying too hard, too desperate for approval, too controlled to access authentic emotion. They didn't understand that Lucy had been performing control since she was 3 years old, that authentic emotion was buried under layers of survival instinct, that she'd learned early not to let anyone see the need underneath. She failed at drama school, but refused to fail at New York. Lucy took modeling jobs. Her height and legs were assets there, and worked as a showgirl, learning to perform beauty and glamour and confidence she didn't feel. She learned makeup tricks, how to light herself perfectly, how to control every aspect of her appearance. She learned that if you controlled the image, people saw what you wanted them to see, not what was really there. It was another kind of armor, beauty as defense mechanism, perfection as protection. In the 1930s, Lucy migrated to Hollywood like thousands of other girls who believed movies would make them stars. She got bit parts, nothing roles, Goldwyn girl positions in chorus lines. She was pretty enough but not stunning, talented enough but not exceptional, working constantly but never breaking through. What she had that others didn't was determination bordering on obsession. She would succeed because failure meant returning to Jamestown, meant admitting Ed Peterson had been right that she was wasting her time, meant proving to herself that she was as worthless as childhood abandonment had suggested. She worked on her physical comedy, studying Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, learning to take falls without hurting herself, training her face to contort in ways that looked painful but were actually precisely controlled. Comedy was math to Lucy, timing, angles, expression, all calculated for maximum effect. Nothing was spontaneous, nothing was left to chance. If you controlled every element, the joke would land. If you calculated perfectly, people would laugh. And if they laughed, they weren't seeing the pain underneath. In 1940, at age 28, Lucy met Desi Arnaz, a Cuban band leader 6 years younger who was everything Lucy wasn't. Spontaneous, passionate, charming, impossible to control. He was handsome in an exotic way that made him a novelty in Hollywood, talented with the conga drum, sexy in a way that made women scream. Lucy fell hard, fast, desperately, the way people fall when they're trying to fill a hole carved by dead father and absent mother, when they're looking for someone to finally choose them permanently, when they need to prove they're lovable enough to make someone stay. They married 6 months after meeting, in November 1940, and the marriage was a disaster from the beginning. Desi drank, gambled, cheated constantly. He was a Cuban band leader in the 1940s, and fidelity was not part of the cultural package. Lucy knew about the affairs, raged about them, threatened divorce repeatedly, and always took him back because leaving meant admitting failure, meant being abandoned again, meant proving that she was unlovable, just like her childhood had suggested. If she could just control him better, change him, make him see that she was enough, maybe he would stop. But you can't control other people, and trying destroyed Lucy. She became suspicious, jealous, monitoring Desi's every move, calling clubs where he performed to see if he was really there, smelling his clothes for perfume. The more she tried to control, the more he pulled away. The more she demanded fidelity, the more he rebelled. It was the fundamental tragedy of Lucille Ball. Control had saved her in childhood, but in adult relationships, control killed everything it touched. In 1951, Lucy and Desi pitched a television show based on their vaudeville act, a comedy about a Cuban bandleader married to a wacky housewife who was always getting into trouble. The networks were skeptical. Desi was too ethnic, too foreign, too wrong for American television. Lucy was almost 40, too old to play a young housewife. And the premise, a woman constantly trying to break into show business while her husband wanted her to stay home, was too close to what network executives considered feminist nonsense. But Lucy and Desi refused to compromise, and they made a deal that would change television forever. They would produce the show themselves, keep ownership, take less salary in exchange for control. Desilu Productions was born, and I Love Lucy premiered on October 15th, 1951. It was an instant phenomenon, the most watched show on television, the first to be filmed in front of a live audience, the first to use the three-camera technique that would become standard, the first where a real-life couple played a married couple on screen. What made I Love Lucy revolutionary wasn't just the comedy, it was Lucy's perfectionism. Every episode was rehearsed endlessly, every line timed to the split second, every pratfall choreographed with precision. Lucy demanded perfection from herself, from Desi, from every actor and crew member. She would do takes 20, 30 times until the timing was exactly right, until the laugh came exactly where she wanted it, until every element was under control. The chaos on screen, Lucy stuffing chocolates in her mouth, stomping grapes, getting drunk on Vitamin, was actually rigid control disguised as spontaneity. The cast and crew learned quickly. Lucy was the boss, and the boss was exacting, demanding, and terrifying when disappointed. She didn't yell. That would be losing control. But she had a way of looking at you with those ice-blue eyes that made you understand you'd failed, that you weren't good enough, that you'd let her down. Desi was the charming one who kept morale up, who made people laugh between takes. Lucy was the one who made sure the show was perfect, and perfection required fear. Her children, Lucy Arnaz, born in 1951, and Desi Arnaz Jr., born in 1953, grew up on the I Love Lucy set, and they learned early that mother was two people, the warm, silly Lucy Ricardo on screen, and the cold, demanding Lucille Ball off-screen. As children, they couldn't understand the difference. They saw their mother make faces and clown around for the camera, then turn to them backstage with barely concealed irritation that they had interrupted her work. They learned not to need her attention, not to expect warmth, not to cry or show emotion, because mother didn't have time for feelings. She had a show to produce, a business to run, an empire to build. Lucy would later say that growing up as Lucy's daughter meant constantly trying to be perfect, knowing you would never be perfect enough, terrified of the moment when mother would look at you with disappointment. Desi Jr. would struggle with addiction and identity, trying to figure out how to be himself when your parents are icons, when your childhood was spent watching them perform Marriage for America, while their real marriage disintegrated in private, because the marriage was disintegrating. I Love Lucy showed America the perfect marriage, Ricky and Lucy, passionate and loving, fighting but always making up, the ideal 1950s couple. But behind the scenes, Desi was drinking heavily, disappearing for days, having affairs that Lucy could no longer pretend weren't happening. and Lucy was working constantly, controlling everything, building Desilu into the largest independent production company in television, making decisions about shows and talent and business that Desi increasingly resented. The more successful Desilu became, the more emasculated Desi felt. He was supposed to be the man, the boss, the one in control. But Lucy was the real power, the one making decisions, the one who understood business in ways Desi, charming, talented, but fundamentally undisciplined, never would. He drank more, gambled more, cheated more, trying to prove he was still a man, even as his wife became the most powerful woman in Hollywood. By 1960, the marriage was unsustainable. Lucy filed for divorce, and America was shocked. Lucy and Ricky, the perfect couple, were ending. The divorce was bitter, complicated by the business they co-owned, by the children who adored both parents, by the public image that needed protecting. Lucy got custody of the children and majority control of Desilu. Desi got his freedom and his demons. They both got the grief of a failed marriage, the admission that love wasn't enough, that even perfection on screen couldn't fix real life. After the divorce, Lucy became even more controlling. She bought out Desi's share of Desilu and became the first woman to run a major television studio. It was groundbreaking, revolutionary, proof that women could be executives and bosses and decision-makers. But it was also isolating. Lucy had no female friends to celebrate with. She'd never made close friendships, never let anyone close enough to see past the armor. She had employees who respected and feared her, but not peers, not equals, not anyone who understood what it cost to be Lucille Ball. She married Gary Morton in 1961, and it was a disaster of a different kind. Gary was a nightclub comedian, pleasant and harmless, completely in Lucy's shadow. He was nothing like Desi, no passion, no danger, no challenge. He was safe, which is what Lucy thought she wanted after the chaos of Desi. But safe meant boring, meant a marriage that was more companionship than love, meant living with someone who worked for you rather than with you. Gary managed Lucy's career, appeared at her events, played the supportive husband for the cameras. But everyone knew the truth. Lucy had married someone she could control, and control is not love. Her children watched this marriage too, learning different lessons. If Desi had taught them that passion was dangerous and men cheated, Gary taught them that safety meant settling, that their mother valued control over connection, that marriage was another kind of performance where you played your role and hoped the audience believed it. In the 1960s and 1970s, Lucy continued working, more TV shows, more specials, more attempts to recapture the I Love Lucy magic. The Lucy Show, Here's Lucy, various specials and appearances, all of them rating successes, all of them showcasing Lucy's physical comedy genius. But the later shows lacked something the early ones had: spontaneity, joy, the sense that Lucy was having fun. Now she was just working, perfecting, controlling, performing the role of Lucille Ball, the comedy legend, because that's who she was supposed to be. Her perfectionism became legendary and isolating. Actors who worked with her talked about the fear. You didn't want to be the one who messed up a take, who made Lucy have to do it again, who disappointed the boss. Directors learned to give her control over every element or face her barely contained rage. Writers learned that Lucy knew comedy better than they did, that she would rewrite their scripts to make the timing perfect, that arguing was futile, because Lucy was usually right, but couldn't admit when she was wrong. She couldn't delegate, couldn't trust anyone else to do it right, couldn't let go of control for even a moment. It meant she worked 16-hour days well into her 70s, reading every script, approving every costume, watching every edit. It meant she was exhausted constantly, her health declining, her body showing the strain of decades of pratfalls and control, and refusing to stop. It meant she had built an empire, but was too busy maintaining control to enjoy it. Her relationship with her children was complicated by this need for control. Lucy became an actress and singer, carving out her own career, but always in her mother's shadow, always compared to Lucy, always dealing with the legacy of being Lucy's daughter. Lucy was proud but critical, supportive but demanding, loving in the way of people who show love through high expectations and disappointment when those expectations aren't met. Desi Jr. had it worse. He became a teen idol in the 1970s, got Patty Duke pregnant when he was 17, struggled with drug addiction, spiraled through the kind of chaos that Lucy couldn't control and therefore couldn't tolerate. She tried to fix him the way she fixed scripts and shows, by taking control, demanding perfection, getting angry when he couldn't just be better. But addiction doesn't work that way, and Desi Jr. had to hit bottom before he could recover, and Lucy had to watch helplessly as her son destroyed himself, unable to control the one thing she most wanted to fix. In the 1980s, Lucy's health declined. Years of smoking caused respiratory issues. Decades of physical comedy had damaged her body. The stress of maintaining control over everything for 70 years was taking its toll. But Lucy kept working, kept appearing on TV, kept showing up for specials and awards shows, because stopping meant admitting weakness, meant losing control, meant being invisible after a lifetime of being seen. In 1986, Lucy underwent heart surgery. The doctors told her to slow down, to reduce stress, to consider retirement. Lucy ignored them. Retirement was for people who had nothing left to prove, nothing left to control, nothing left to be. She was Lucille Ball, and Lucille Ball worked, performed, controlled, didn't know how to be anything else. Her children worried. Her friends, the few she had left, worried. Gary worried. But you couldn't tell Lucy to stop any more than you could tell the sun to stop rising. Control was her identity. Work was her armor. And without them, who was she? Just a woman with a dead father and an abandoning mother, and a long history of pushing people away to protect herself from being hurt. Better to keep working, keep controlling, keep performing the role of Lucille Ball, comedy legend, until the performance killed her. On April 18, 1989, Lucy had severe chest pain. She was hospitalized, underwent emergency heart surgery. The doctors replaced her aortic valve, and for a few days, it seemed like she would recover, that even at 77, Lucille Ball was too tough to die. But on April 26th, her aorta dissected, a catastrophic tear that no surgery could fix. She died that morning, her children at her bedside, Gary holding her hand, the control finally loosened, because death is the one thing you can't manage, can't perfect, can't do 20 takes of until you get it right. The world mourned Lucille Ball as a comedy legend, an icon, a pioneer. The obituaries praised her genius, her groundbreaking career, her role in shaping television. They mentioned her perfectionism as admirable quality, her work ethic as inspiring example. They talked about I Love Lucy as timeless comedy, about Desilu as revolutionary business, about Lucy as woman ahead of her time. All of it was true, and all of it missed the tragedy. The tragedy was that Lucille Ball's perfectionism wasn't admirable. It was armor, built brick by brick from childhood trauma, from a father who died when she was 3, from a mother who sent her away, from a stepfather who didn't want her, from decades of learning that control was survival and perfection was protection. She wasn't ahead of her time. She was running from her past, building empires to prove she had value, demanding perfection to avoid criticism, controlling everything to avoid the chaos that had destroyed her childhood. Her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., mourned the complicated woman who was their mother, loving but distant, proud but critical, present but absent simultaneously. They had grown up watching her perform, first for cameras and then for the world, and they'd spent their lives trying to figure out where the performance ended and the real mother began, whether there was a real mother underneath or if Lucy had become the role so completely that Lucille Ball, the person, no longer existed. Lucy later spoke about the difficulty of being Lucy's daughter, about the pressure to be perfect, about learning that mother's love was conditional on achievement, about the way Lucy showed affection through criticism and improvement rather than acceptance. She spoke about it not with anger, but with understanding. Lucy had done the best she could with the emotional tools she'd been given, and the emotional tools she'd been given were control, perfection, and performance. You can't give what you never received, and Lucy had never received unconditional love from anyone who stayed. Desi Jr. spoke less about his mother, but his struggles with addiction and identity spoke volumes. Growing up as Desi Arnaz Jr., son of two legends, with your childhood televised and your parents' marriage disintegrating in public while they performed Love for America, it was training in the same performance Lucy had learned, the same split between public image and private reality, the same exhausting maintenance of control over how you appeared versus how you actually were. Desi Sr., her first husband, outlived her by only a year. He died in 1986, and when Lucy heard, she reportedly said nothing, just sat quietly, with whatever complex feelings you have for someone who was your partner and enemy, your love and destroyer, the father of your children, and the man who hurt you repeatedly. They had created something beautiful together. I love Lucy, Desilu, two children, and they had also created wreckage, and sometimes the beautiful and the wreckage are so intertwined you can't separate them. Gary Morton, her second husband, spoke about Lucy with carefully chosen words after her death, about her talent, her work ethic, her legacy. He didn't speak about the intimacy or lack thereof, about the marriage that was more partnership than passion, about living in the shadow of someone who was more monument than wife. But his silence said enough. Lucy had married safety and spent 28 years proving that safety without passion is just another kind of loneliness. The people who had worked with Lucy over the decades told stories. Some were about her genius, how she could time a joke to the millisecond, how her physical comedy was precision, masquerading as chaos, how she understood camera angles and lighting better than most cinematographers. Some were about her tyranny, the cold stares when you disappointed her, the impossible standards, the fear of being the one who ruined a take. And some were about the glimpses of vulnerability that occasionally appeared. Lucy crying alone in her dressing room, Lucy admitting she was tired, Lucy saying she didn't know how to stop working, because work was all she had. The control that had saved her in childhood destroyed her in adulthood. When your father dies at 3 and your mother sends you away, control makes sense. If you can control your behavior, maybe people will keep you. If you can be perfect, maybe you won't be abandoned. Control is survival strategy for traumatized children, but in adulthood, control prevents intimacy, pushes away the people who try to love you, builds walls so high that no one can climb them, even when you desperately want someone to try. Lucy died having built an empire, but very few real relationships. She died having proven she was lovable through achievement, but never having felt loved for just being herself. She died having spent 77 years performing comedy, performing marriage, performing the role of Lucille Ball, television legend, and never quite figuring out how to just be Lucille, the girl whose father died, whose mother left, who learned too young that love was unreliable, but control was constant. The perfectionism that made her greatest also made her loneliest. When you demand perfection from yourself, you demand it from everyone around you, and no one can sustain that level of perfection indefinitely. People fail, disappoint, reveal themselves to be flawed humans rather than perfect performers. And if you can't tolerate flaws, you end up alone, surrounded by employees who work for you, but no one who knows you. People who admire you, but don't dare to love you, because loving you means constant fear of failure. Her comedy was her refuge and her prison. The rubber face, the pratfalls, the physical humor that made millions laugh. It was all precisely controlled chaos, math disguised as spontaneity, performance masquerading as authentic emotion. Lucy wasn't really being silly on I Love Lucy. She was calculating exactly how silly to be, timing her facial expressions to the fraction of a second, taking falls that looked spontaneous but were choreographed to perfection. The laughter was real, but the person making them laugh was performing, always performing, never able to stop, because stopping meant being seen without the armor. There's a particular tragedy in being a clown who can't feel joy. Lucy made millions of people happy every week, gave them half an hour of laughter and lightness, and the comfort of watching Lucy Ricardo mess up and recover and be loved by Ricky despite everything. But Lucy herself couldn't access that happiness, couldn't turn off the director in her head, that was constantly calculating angles and timing and control. She gave joy but couldn't receive it, made love look easy on screen while failing at it spectacularly in real life, performed perfection while being destroyed by the performance. The I Love Lucy shows remain perfect. They don't age, don't decline, will be funny for as long as people watch television. The episodes are time capsules of Lucy's genius, preserved forever in black and white, and that famous red hair, actually orange, chosen specifically for how it photographed in black and white, another example of Lucy's control over every detail. Watching them now, you see a woman at the peak of her powers, commanding the screen, making comedy look effortless while performing the hardest thing in the world, making yourself vulnerable for laughs while maintaining perfect control over every element. But you also see, if you know to look for it, the performance within the performance. Lucy Ricardo was who Lucy wanted to be, loved unconditionally by a husband who stayed, forgivable despite constant mistakes, human and flawed and still acceptable. But Lucille Ball couldn't be Lucy Ricardo off-screen, couldn't allow herself the mistakes, couldn't trust that people would stay if she showed flaws, couldn't believe that love could be unconditional when all the love she'd known in childhood had been very, very conditional. Her legacy is complicated. She was a pioneer, first woman to run a major studio, one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, a groundbreaker who proved women could be executives and bosses and decision-makers. She was a genius. Her physical comedy hasn't been matched. Her understanding of television as medium was revolutionary. Her impact on the medium is incalculable. But she was also a tyrant, a control freak, a perfectionist who destroyed relationships in pursuit of flawlessness, someone who died having achieved everything professionally while failing at almost everything personal. The question is whether she could have been different. If Henry Ball hadn't died when Lucy was 3, would she have learned to trust instead of control? If Dee Dee hadn't sent her away, would she have believed love was reliable? If Ed Peterson had been warm instead of cold, would she have been able to be vulnerable instead of perfect? The alternate universe where Lucy's childhood was different is unknowable. But what we know is this: trauma shapes us, and the coping mechanisms we develop in childhood become our adult identities, and by the time we realize the armor is suffocating us, we've built our entire life around it and don't know how to function without it. Lucille Ball died at 77, having built a fortress out of perfection, and inside the fortress she was alone. And that aloneness killed her as surely as the dissecting aorta did. She died having pushed away almost everyone who tried to love her, having raised children who feared disappointing her more than they felt comfortable with her, having married 2 men, one she couldn't control and one she controlled too much, and finding happiness with neither. She died as she had lived, performing control, demanding perfection, never quite believing she was good enough just as she was, never quite healing the wound carved by a father who died and a mother who sent her away, and a childhood that taught her that love was something you earned through flawlessness, rather than something you deserved simply for existing. The world lost a comedy genius when Lucille Ball died, but the real loss happened much earlier, when a little girl named Lucy learned that the world wasn't safe, that people left, that control was survival and perfection was armor, and showing vulnerability was inviting pain. That little girl grew up to be Lucille Ball, television legend, comedy icon, powerful executive, perfectionist tyrant, and she died having achieved everything except the one thing she actually needed: to be loved without having to be perfect, to be chosen without having to earn it, to be enough just as she was. She spent 77 years trying to control her way to that feeling, and what she learned, what killed her, was that control is the opposite of love, that perfection prevents intimacy, that you can build empires and win awards and make millions of people laugh and still die alone because the fortress you built to protect yourself became the prison that trapped you. Lucille Ball, 1911-1989, comedy legend, television pioneer, studio executive, perfectionist, control freak, genius, tyrant, daughter, mother, wife, and underneath all of it, just Lucy, the little girl whose father died and whose mother sent her away, who spent 77 years trying to prove she was worth keeping and died never quite believing it, no matter how perfect the performance.